People with extensive life experience often say that a single day can drastically change everything. Such a day occurred in the life of Sarah Chandler. She remembered it in the smallest details and frequently revisited each episode in her memory. On that spring day, Sarah was passing time in the company of Tovah, the concierge with whom she had a long-standing friendly relationship. In the midst of their conversation, the front door slammed loudly, causing Sarah to wince as if from a toothache. She's here. How many times have I asked her not to slam the door? She just smiles and it happens again. It's easier to teach monkey manners than her. Tovah sipped tea from a porcelain cup with pleasure before expressing sympathy to her friend. Yes, you're unlucky with your daughter-in-law. I can't even imagine what it's like to be a mother-in-law. I'm fortunate to have a daughter. Oh, Tovah, don't cut me to the heart. I'm suffering enough. She wanted to add something else, but heard some rustling near the dining room door, followed by a ringing voice asking, "Mum, are you in there with Tovah? Am I interrupting?" A nervous twitch ran across Sarah's face. The woman whispered quietly to herself, "What kind of mother am I to you?" But aloud she said quite firmly, "Come in, we have no secrets. You're the one with all the nonsense in your head." One leaf of the door opened, and a young woman squeezed into the room. Stroking her big belly, she nodded to Tovah, then asked, "May I join you? While I was shopping, the baby got hungry." Sarah, instead of answering, made a sound resembling a grunt. Her guest immediately burst into laughter, but the hostess gave her a pointed look. "Tovah, laughter without reason is a sign of you-know-what. And anyway, what have I done that could cause laughter?" While her friend was pondering how to answer the rebuke, the owner of the luxurious apartment in the elite high-rise turned her attention back to her daughter-in-law. "Annie, why are you frozen like a statue? I've noticed you often stay in such a state, and it alarms me. At such moments you remind me of, well, I'd better keep silent, as offending pregnant women is considered a great sin. But I'm really afraid that all of this will be passed on to the baby." The young woman tried to smile. "I'm not a statue. I'm just waiting for you to blow off steam." The mother-in-law glared at her daughter-in-law, her voice making the dishes in the cabinet rattle. "I'm not a pressure cooker to let off steam. How many times do I have to ask you to watch your language? And you should be more modest in someone else's house." The mother-in-law emphasized the last phrase. The reaction was immediate. Tears gushed from the daughter-in-law's eyes, and she dashed out of the dining room. Tovah also hurried to rise from the table. "Perhaps I'd better go. I don't like being present during family squabbles. Any scandals have a depressing effect on me since childhood." Sarah rushed after her guests. "Tovah, wait! Don't pay attention! We haven't finished talking!" The concierge turned around. "We'll have time. When you've calmed down, come and see me. I live modestly, but without the hassle." Tovah went out, carefully closing the door behind her. Sarah stood for a while, at a loss, trying to gather her thoughts. From the far room came the sound of her daughter-in-law sobbing. The woman tiptoed closer and listened. She expected to hear curses directed at her, but only the sobs of her daughter-in-law echoed through the apartment. Sarah thought with irritation, "She doesn't think about the child at all, and what kind of mother will she be?" She immediately answered her own question. "Good-for-nothing mother. She's not a good wife either. I don't know what Ethan sees in her. Tovah is right. I need to calm down, or I'll have a heart attack." Sarah squeezed out a stingy tear and returned to the dining room, where she had everything she needed at her fingertips. This was where she spent most of her spare time, and she really didn't want to change her routine. Taking heart drops from the medicine cabinet, Sarah thought, very soon she will give birth, and everything in the house will be turned upside down. Realizing that she could not avoid this fate, the woman decided to take a double dose of the medication. In just 5 minutes, she felt relieved. She then started looking for the TV remote. Where did I put it? It's the final episode of the show tonight. Sarah's main weakness from the old days was soap operas. When Howard Chandler, her husband, was still alive, he used to tease her. "Sarah, you should read books. It's much more useful. Or join a hobby club. Find some friends there." But the woman would answer her husband, "Howard, if it were necessary, I would do exactly that. But I feel quite comfortable in the home environment. Do you think I'm idle?" She remembered how her husband had ridiculously rolled his eyes and assured her that such thoughts had never crossed his mind. Sarah sighed heavily and shifted her gaze to her husband's portrait. Although more than 6 years had passed since his death, she had not grown accustomed to living without him. In difficult moments, the widow took the portrait of her beloved man in her hands and asked him for advice. Now she also could not resist. "Howard, what should I do? I cannot be in the same apartment with this woman because I have such a strong antipathy toward her." For a moment, it seemed to her that her spouse in the portrait was frowning. The woman returned the family heirloom to its place and said sadly, "You're judging me, and Ethan resents me for treating his wife badly. But I can't get over myself. I didn't like her at first sight." Ethan was a late child in the family, but his father did not allow him to be spoiled. Once he witnessed an unpleasant scene when 7-year-old Ethan demanded some kind of toy from his mother. Howard Chandler didn't even bother to look into the dispute. He grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck like a kitten and gave him a good shake. Ethan got a great fright and immediately stopped crying. But the father didn't stop there. He also reprimanded the boy. "Remember, son, in our family, there are no slobbering, whiners or weaklings. That's why you should learn to uphold our reputation from childhood. If I see you begging your mother for anything again, you'll be scolded severely." Sarah wanted to stand up for her son, but her husband's glare made her forget all the necessary words. Ethan learned that lesson well and never again showed vulnerability. After graduating from the college, his father got him a job in his company, and Ethan began to climb the career ladder successfully. Shortly before his death, Mr. Chandler said, "Now I can die in peace because my son has fully justified my hopes." Sarah then chided her husband. "You're all about our son. But what about me? I can't live a day without you. You have no right to die before me." They laughed together at her quite bad joke. But soon after, Mr. Chandler died suddenly in his car. He had been feeling ill since the afternoon and called his wife. "Sarah, I'm not feeling well. Please, prepare some herbal tea. I'll be right there." But the man didn't make it home. He couldn't even start the car and died behind the wheel. On the screen flashed scenes from an exciting detective story, but Sarah lost the thread of events, recalling her past. Finally, she clicked the remote control button. "I'll watch it later. I'll go to Tovah better." The next room was quiet, and the woman thought her daughter-in-law was asleep. Trying not to make any noise, she opened the apartment door and headed for the elevator. Tovah lived 2 floors down. The women weren't exactly friends. Their relationship was more like that of acquaintances, and it all began rather mundanely. Sarah considered her marriage a lucky lottery ticket because Howard Chandler showed a great promise even in college, and everyone predicted a dizzying career for him in the scientific field. But the young man quickly cooled to science, considering it a useless occupation at a time when every sensible person was trying to earn more. Learning that her husband had decided to engage in commercial activities, Sarah first tried to dissuade him. "Howard, come to your senses. Trading brilliant prospects for a dubious occupation is the height of folly." Her husband looked at her condescendingly. "My dear, foolishness is working for someone else and settling for a paltry handout from their table. A golden opportunity only comes once in a lifetime. I don't want to miss it." Changes for the better followed almost immediately. First, the family moved out of the hostel into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, and after 2 years, they moved into a big country house. The young woman could hardly believe her luck. However, the delight soon passed, and Sarah realized she couldn't cope with the huge household alone. She told her husband about her problems, and he reassured her, "Tomorrow you'll have an assistant, a very good, decent woman. She's the daughter of my father's acquaintance. In short, a trusted person." Tovah immediately impressed Sarah because she didn't meddle or ask unnecessary questions. For about 20 years, this woman created comfort in their large house. When they decided to move to the city, Howard Chandler said firmly, "I think it would be right if we took Tovah with us. I've already found her a good job with an apartment." The former housekeeper agreed without hesitations to retrain as a concierge. For several more years, their family spent summers in the country house, and, after her husband's death, she and her son decided to sell the mansion. But Sarah didn't regret this decision at all, because she was no longer at an age to split her time between the city and the cottage settlement. She and her son had enough with their luxury apartment in a new building. Perhaps Sarah's comfortable life would have continued for many more years if Annie hadn't appeared. In just a few months, this naive provincial managed to upend the woman's life. "I want to run away from home." With this despairing thought, Sarah pressed the doorbell button. Tovah didn't open at once. She fiddled with the lock for a long time. "Sarah, is that you? Wait a minute, something's stuck. I've been meaning to ask Stefan to look at the lock for ages, but I keep forgetting." At last the door opened, and the landlady said cheerfully, "Come on in, but watch your step. I've got some laundry going." The washing machine hummed in the bathroom. The guest hesitated at the door. "Oh, I'm not catching you at a good time. I'd better come back later." Tovah nudged her toward the kitchen. "It's all right. My son-in-law gave me the smartest machine that does everything, so we'll be able to talk in peace." Tovah looked fondly at her friend. "I can see you're suffering, and I really want to help you." Sarah confessed, "That's why I came to you. I have no one else to turn to." "And rightly so. Now, I'll put the kettle on, and you can tell me all about what's troubling you." The guest made herself comfortable at the table. "Well, there's not much to tell. It's just that, after Ethan's marriage, my life became a living hell. Don't get me wrong. I don't mind that my son got married, but I never imagined that wretched creature from the provinces would be his chosen one." Tovah wrinkled her nose. "Her bad influence has taken its toll on you. You've never allowed yourself such expressions before. But let me ask you an indiscreet question. What exactly do you dislike about her? Doesn't she treat you with respect? She even calls you Mum. Soon she'll give you a grandchild." Sarah waved her hand irritably, as if shooing away an annoying insect. "Tovah, this is all beside the point. My daughter-in-law is a very cunning woman. She's ready to do anything for the sake of... The guest stumbled mid-sentence, unable to articulate a reasonable explanation for her daughter-in-law's supposed malicious intent. Tovah decided to help her. "I can't understand, Sarah. What bothers you more, Annie's provincial origin or something else?" Sarah replied immediately, "Origin has nothing to do with it. I know many decent people who grew up in villages. I'm more concerned about how quickly she gained Ethan's trust. He was dating Arija before her. She's a well-educated girl from a good family and much younger than Annie. And then, forgive my bluntness, but I find it difficult to believe a 28-year-old woman has an impeccably clean past." Tovah exclaimed with undisguised glee. "So that's what worries you. You know, I agree with you here. Indeed, it's very suspicious, as is her rapid pregnancy. I don't like prying into others' affairs, but I think your daughter-in-law was already pregnant when she got married, wasn't she?" Sarah exhaled so loudly that her friend looked at her anxiously. She rubbed the edge of her light jacket for a long moment before answering. "I don't know for certain, but that seems to be the case. And I have a nagging doubt that this child isn't Ethan's." "And what does he say about it?" Sarah averted her eyes. "Tovah, I won't discuss such topics with my son. He's a grown man who should understand these things himself." "But did you at least hint at it?" "I did, but he asked me not to meddle where I wasn't asked. But Tovah, I can't keep quiet. I can't find peace. When I imagine her bringing a stranger's child into our house, and Ethan feeding, clothing, and educating him." The woman could no longer contain herself and burst into tears. "I've aged 20 years in these past months. I take sedatives daily. That woman will put me in my grave prematurely and ruin Ethan's life. How can I accept this? Any mother would protect her child from harm, even if he's an adult." Tovah listened to her friend's lamentations with a sad expression, her mind working furiously. When Sarah regained her composure, she said in a conspiratorial tone, "Listen, my friend, you can't do this alone. You need to change Ethan's mind. You must open his eyes. Find evidence that will make him reconsider living with this woman. Your daughter-in-law didn't fall from another planet, did she? She must have friends or acquaintances with whom you can discreetly gather information." Sarah hesitated, but soon her eyes lit up, and she exclaimed joyfully, "Tovah, you're a genius! Why didn't I think of this myself?" At their wedding, there was her friend Camille, who only stayed briefly to deliver a gift before leaving. Annie tried to persuade her to stay, but she wouldn't. I saw the way they looked at each other, and even then I suspected there was bad blood between them. You need to find this Camille immediately. Talk to her, and if necessary, offer her some money. It is particularly effective at loosening tongues. I suggest you hurry. When is your daughter-in-law due?" "I'm not sure, but soon. She mentioned late May or early June." Tovah chided her friend. "You should know these things. Such details can be crucial in divorce proceedings." Sarah, having regained her confidence, replied, "If you're referring to establishing paternity, the simplest method nowadays is a DNA test." Tovah smirked. "Sarah, you're so naive. Don't you know that for the right price, you can obtain any test result you want?" "Of course. I hadn't considered that." The friends discussed the details of their plan and its potential consequences at length. Sarah was so engrossed in the new idea that she lost track of time. She arrived at her apartment in the evening, just as Ethan returned from work. Ethan first planted a dutiful kiss on his mother's cheek before asking reproachfully, "Mum, where have you been? Annie and I were starting to worry." The woman eyed her son suspiciously. "Your satisfied expression doesn't suggest you were worried about me. I was at Tovah's. Otherwise, I'd rot from boredom within these four walls." The man exclaimed cheerfully, "It's all right, Mother. You'll soon forget your sorrows and loneliness." I wonder what could possibly have such an impact on my life. "Grandchildren. Mum, imagine, Annie is having twins. The doctors have suggested it before, but they weren't certain, so we didn't tell you. But today she had another ultrasound and it's confirmed. Would you like to see your grandchildren?" Sarah took the small picture in her son's hands and recoiled sharply, as if it posed a threat to her life. "No need. I don't want to look at those pictures." Ethan's joyful smile instantly vanished. "Mum, what are you doing? Aren't you happy that you'll soon have grandchildren?" The woman smirked. "I see no reason to be happy yet, and I'll have you know that neither your father nor I ever had twins in our families. Scientists say it's a hereditary trait, so you have reason to wonder." The man hesitantly objected. "Perhaps Annie's relatives have had similar cases." "Perhaps so, perhaps not. However, I'm not interested in such details." Ethan stood there looking confused. He tried to understand what his mother was implying, but the woman could see in his eyes that the seed of doubt had already been planted in the heart of the future father. Now they must wait for it to sprout. Of course, she felt a twinge of guilt for her son, knowing her words had dealt him a painful blow, but she fervently believed that this pain was for the sake of his future happiness, that her daughter-in-law had deceived Ethan. This conviction grew stronger every day in the mind of the mother, who strove to better arrange her son's life, but she needed facts to prove it. She quickly found Annie's friend. Camille worked as a manager in a reputable company, and her number was discovered in her daughter-in-law's cell phone while she was showering. In order not to arouse unnecessary suspicion in Annie, the mother-in-law went for a walk in the park, and from there made an important call. Camille wasn't surprised by the woman's call, but agreed to it immediately. "Mrs. Chandler, I have lunch in half an hour. If it's not convenient, please wait for me." Sarah was willing to wait even an hour for the necessary information. Young mothers with children strolled through the park, but this sight didn't please her. She couldn't imagine carrying other people's children in strollers. The very thought was repulsive. The woman muttered in her heart, "Never let that happen. I'll never accept these brats." That's how she preemptively dubbed the unborn babies. Camille quickly grasped what her former friend's mother-in-law wanted. Given her own grudge against Annie, she held nothing back. "Mrs. Chandler, I understand you completely. You're a mother worried about your son's fate. I don't want to speak ill of anyone, especially since Annie and I were friends. But I won't hide anything from you either. You see, Annie isn't who she pretends to be. She's calculating and cynical, but she has a good role model. Gina, Annie's mum, has angered many people in our city." Sarah was surprised. "She seemed like a pleasant woman to me. After all, she's a teacher." "Oh, Mrs. Chandler, teachers are people too, and they often have sins that would make your hair stand on end. I don't know the exact details, it's an old story, but rumours say Annie's mother stole the father from the same family. She's been a widow for years. Annie's father died in an accident before her daughter was born, so Gina sought comfort in the arms of other women's men." "And Annie herself? What did she do? I can tell you've had a falling out with her." Camille looked away and sobbed. "I hate dredging up old memories, but my best friend ruined my life. In our village there were the twins Jacob and Charlie Horton. Charlie was very sickly. He had a congenital heart defect and didn't live to see 20. But Jacob is still alive and well. He started courting Annie, but she only mocked him. Once I asked her why she was tormenting the young man, and she said he was too old for her. Indeed, there's a 13-year age gap. For a 20-year-old girl, such a suitor seems ancient." Sarah, impatient for incriminating information, hurried her interlocutor. "And then? Did they break up?" "Well, yes. I told her directly that she was like the dog in the manger, neither taking him herself nor letting others." Annie laughed and said I could have Jacob if I wanted. Then she left for the city, and Jacob and I started dating. 2 years later he proposed, but just as our life together was improving, Annie reappeared, and my lawful husband began chasing after her like a puppy. Sarah fidgeted impatiently on the bench. "And then what?" Camille, also bored with the conversation, replied dryly, "We divorced. Jacob himself filed, saying he couldn't deceive himself any more. I knew he went to the city to be near his beloved. I got over it with time. I had only resentment towards my friend. I know Annie and Jacob were dating. I think they even vacationed at the sea together. Social media is full of their photos. And then Suddenly I learn Annie is marrying someone else, your son. To be honest, this news surprised me. I even went to the wedding to make sure it was true. That's basically it." Sarah was disappointed. "I was hoping to hear something more substantial from you." Camille leaned closer. "You can find more substantial information on your daughter-in-law's phone or internet page. She's there under her maiden name, DeSando. Believe me, there's a lot of interesting stuff, including romantic correspondences with Jacob. I can also tell you the worst-kept secret of all. Just a week or two ago, these lovebirds met. I saw them with my own eyes. Annie was shopping for baby items in a department store, and Jacob was nearby, probably advising her." Sarah mumbled confusedly, "Annie is having twins." Camille clapped her hands. "Is that so? What an exceptional coincidence! Jacob also has a twin brother." Sarah wanted to give the girl money, but she refused. "I do good deeds for free. I was happy to help you. Call me if you need anything else." The woman's mind was in complete chaos. Unable to organize her thoughts, she decided to consult Tovah again. The events of the following days unfolded rapidly, but this no longer pleased Sarah. On the contrary, it greatly worried her. Her son's mental state concerned her most. After hearing all the details of the conversation with Camille, Ethan walked around like a thundercloud. He became irritable, answering all her questions with undisguised anger. "Mum, how do you expect me to take everything you've told me? Should I sing and dance?" The mother decided to stop pestering her son. When he came home from work, she never left her room. They no longer dined together, and at some point the woman felt like an outcast in her own apartment. To escape this unpleasant feeling, she began going out in the evenings. One day, returning from another walk, Sarah heard her son and daughter-in-law's raised voices. The woman froze in the hallway, straining to listen. Ethan's sharp voice pierced the air. "Annie, you'd better tell me everything honestly." Her daughter-in-law was crying, her voice broken and trembling. "I've already told you everything. Your suspicions are groundless. If you don't believe me, we can do a test." "I don't believe in those tests. I'm not going to embarrass myself." "Ethan, I beg you, forget your suspicions. I love only you, and I want us to be happy. Soon we'll have babies and be joyful parents." "That's impossible. As long as I have doubts, a happy life is out of the question. You hid your past from me. You didn't tell me anything about your lover." "Jacob is my friend. We had nothing between us." "But your hot photo shoot on the beach says otherwise." "I don't know what you saw in those innocent pictures." "Just the fact that you're both standing in each other's arms." "Ethan, this is all speculation, a figment of your sick imagination." The man raised his voice. "Am I the one with a sick imagination?" Annie screamed hysterically. "Ethan, why don't you believe me? Why are you being so cruel now, when I'm in this condition?" "You don't deserve any other attitude. I'll tell you more. Our marriage was a mistake, and please, don't use your pregnancy as a shield. It doesn't impress me any more." The door of the room opened abruptly, and Ethan stormed into the hallway. When he saw his mother, he grinned wryly. "Sarah Chandler, are you happy now? You got what you wanted." The man wagged his finger playfully at his mother. "And it's not nice to eavesdrop." Then he yanked his windbreaker off the coat rack and bolted out the door. His mother rushed after him. "Son, wait! Where are you going?" "I'm going to get some air." Ethan thundered down the steps, and to his mother, the sound of his footsteps seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. She returned to the apartment and leaned against the wall. Annie's sobs could still be heard from the far room. Sarah listened to this cry of despair, feeling a twinge of unease. For a moment, a thought flashed in her mind. Go and talk to the poor girl, comfort her. But then the woman suppressed this faint impulse. She wasn't going to show sympathy for her daughter-in-law, despite her condition. She didn't want to be alone in the apartment with the one she believed had turned her life into a nightmare. So, out of habit, she went to Tovah's. Her friend greeted her cordially, as usual. "I knew you'd come by. How are things going?" Sarah admitted, "Tovah, I didn't think it would be so hard. Ethan's not himself. This girl cries all day long. She doesn't leave the room. She doesn't eat anything." Sarah expected support from her friend, but Tovah's face suddenly turned stony. "Well, you achieved this with all your might. Judging by your story, everything is going according to plan, and Ethan will soon send his wife packing. So you can celebrate your victory." "Are you mocking me?" "No, I'm quite serious. You've been dreaming of getting rid of your hated daughter-in-law, haven't you? It's almost done. There's only a little bit left. Don't you feel any joy?" "No, Tovah, I don't. I don't feel well at heart. Anxious somehow." Her friend patted her on the shoulder. "It will pass. It's always like this when you're not used to it. Shall we have some tea?" "Thank you. I don't feel like it. I'd better go home and check on her." The apartment was quiet, and Sarah sighed with relief. She went to her room to sleep, but in the middle of the night she was awakened by her son's loud voice. The woman rushed into the corridor and was stunned. Ethan was barely on his feet. The mother cried out in horror, "Are you drunk?" The son steadied himself, gripping her shoulders. "No, Mum. I've only had a little drink. I met some great guys. We talked about life and had a little snack. That is, first we drank, and then—" Ethan decided to demonstrate his vocal prowess, but his mother shouted at him. "Quiet! Don't shout, you'll wake up Annie." The man hiccuped. "Annie? Who's Annie?" Sarah grew angry. "Why are you playing dumb? Annie is your wife." Ethan waved his hand dismissively. "Mother, I don't have a wife anymore. And over there," he pointed to the door of the room, "is a stranger. She won't be here tomorrow." "Don't talk nonsense. Where will she go?" "She'll be out of my life forever. I've burned all my bridges today. There's no turning back." The man swayed again, but Sarah managed to support him. "Come, I'll walk you to your bed. You'll sleep in the living room tonight." "Mom, I'll do as you say. I want you to be happy." Ethan was babbling nonsense as she struggled to get him onto the sofa and covered him with a blanket. Soon, Ethan was snoring softly. Sarah approached the chest of drawers where her husband's portrait stood and whispered, "Howard, please don't judge me. I'm doing all this for our son's sake. This wound will heal, and he'll be happy again." She waited expectantly for a sign, but heard nothing except the ticking clock and Ethan snoring. That night Sarah lay awake once more. In the morning her daughter-in-law went into labour. With Ethan in a deep sleep, she had to call an ambulance herself. Later, Sarah struggled to rouse her son. Ethan remained disorientated for a while. She ushered him out of the dining room, saying, "Go take a shower. You'll feel better immediately, and I warn you, if you show up in such a disgraceful state again—" The man attempted to laugh, but winced, clutching his head. "Mum, can we save the lecture for later? You have no idea how awful I feel. My head's pounding like a drum." "It's your own fault. You shouldn't have drunk. You've never been one for hard liquor. Why did you overindulge?" Ethan grimaced again. "Mum, why ask such obvious questions? You know why. I wanted to relieve stress, but I overdid it. I promise it won't happen again." After 2 cups of strong tea, Ethan felt slightly better. He went to change, but didn't notice his wife's absence. His mother decided against telling him that Annie had been taken to the maternity hospital overnight, thinking, "He'll be more alert by evening. I'll tell him then." All day the woman was on edge. At first she refrained from inquiring about her daughter-in-law's condition, but near lunchtime she called. A cheerful female voice informed her, "Annie Chandler has given birth to boys. They're a bit underweight but strong. Congratulations!" The woman hung up without expressing gratitude for the news. Conflicting emotions surged within her, prompting her to seek her friend's counsel. Since Tovah was at work, Sarah descended to the first floor. The concierge greeted her listlessly. "Hello. Decided to share in my boredom?" Sarah sensed her friend's weariness of involvement in her problems. "Tovah, am I becoming a burden?" The concierge forced a smile. "No, I'm just not in the best mood today." "Neither am I, though by rights I should be elated." Tovah perked up slightly. "Oh? What extraordinary event transpired overnight?" "My daughter-in-law gave birth to twins, boys." "Wow! Should I congratulate you?" Sarah sighed deeply. "I think congratulations are inappropriate here. Let her receive them from the one responsible for these children." "You still believe your Annie gave birth to another man's children?" "I'm certain of it." Her friend averted her gaze. "You know best." Sensing the conversation's futility, Sarah returned home. She anxiously awaited her son's return from work. When the apartment door opened noisily, she rushed to the hallway. "Ethan, I didn't want to tell you this morning." Her son silenced her with a look. "Mum, if you're about to tell me that my wife gave birth, you're too late. I'm aware. She called me." He brushed past her into his room. Sarah hurried after him. "Ethan, what are you going to do?" "Nothing." The door slammed in the bewildered woman's face. Sarah realized it was best to leave her son alone. The next day she called the hospital again to inquire about her daughter-in-law and visiting hours, and learning what she could bring, she packed some apples and juice and set off for the hospital. A nagging thought persisted. "Why are you going there? You have no business there." She hesitated several times, nearly turning back, but pressed on. The maternity ward accepted parcels in a separate room during specific hours, resulting in a queue. The elderly woman's attention was drawn to a distinguished man with greying temples. He seemed familiar, and she struggled to place him. When his turn came, he handed a large package to the nurse, saying, "These are for Annie Chandler." Sarah Chandler trembled, her legs weakening. She left the hospital without waiting her turn. The man also exited, heading for the parking lot. She watched him, mesmerized, and suddenly whispered in astonishment, "So this is Jacob from the photo. I was right about everything." When she returned home, Sarah took the apples and juice out of the bag and neatly arranged them on the refrigerator shelves. She felt depressed and listless. Not wanting to think about anything, she spent the whole day watching TV. When her son came home from work, she didn't go out to meet him, fearing to see the pain in his eyes. 3 days later, Annie called. Her daughter-in-law no longer addressed her as Mum, but used a formal tone. "Mrs. Chandler, I don't know what's going on or why Ethan isn't answering my calls, so I decided to contact you. We're being discharged tomorrow, and I need things for the kids. I've prepared everything in advance. They're in my closet on the bottom shelf." The mother-in-law hesitated before replying. "Okay, I'll bring them to you myself. And please tell Ethan that he still has a chance to make things right. Soon it will be too late." Never before had her daughter-in-law spoken to her in such a tone. Sarah, wanting to put this insolent girl in her place, raised her voice. "Listen, Annie, don't pretend to be innocent. You know and understand everything perfectly well. Your scheme didn't work out, and that's why you're freaking out." Short beeps came from the phone, and the mother-in-law realized her daughter-in-law had hung up. She gloated into the void. To hell with you. Good thing we got rid of you and your brats in time." On the day of Annie's discharge from the maternity hospital, Sarah decided to follow her, curious about where she was going and who would meet her. When she shared her plans with Tovah, the latter's eyes widened in surprise. "Sarah, I don't understand why you need to do this. There's plenty of evidence already." Sarah, after listening to her friend, said, "I want to make sure again." The concierge guessed the reason for this interest. "Is your conscience already bothering you?" Sarah replied defensively, "Nothing is bothering me. By the way, it was you who told me how to get rid of my daughter-in-law." Tovah was stunned. "Wow, now you're blaming me? You know what, Sarah? Go, and don't interfere with my work. And when you want to cry, find another shoulder." This was said in such a tone that Sarah fled to the elevator. She realized that she would no longer have the same trusting relationship with her friend. However, Sarah Chandler was not one to admit her mistakes, so she mentally asked the concierge to go to hell, without any regret about the rupture of friendly relations. On the day of Annie and the baby's discharge, Sarah arrived at the maternity hospital early. She desperately wanted to prove herself right once again. Finding a convenient observation spot, she soon saw a familiar car approach the hospital. Sarah immediately recognized the man who handed a package to Annie. She whispered with satisfaction, "Just as I thought." About half an hour later, Annie appeared on the hospital's front steps, holding a huge bouquet of white roses. Two women in white coats accompanied the young mother, each carrying a blue bundle with a baby. A man then took both baby bundles from the nurses, and they all headed towards the parking lot. Sarah whispered again, "That proves everything." She watched the happy mother get into the car with the man who had greeted her and angrily muttered, "No shame, no conscience. Ethan was right to cut ties immediately." She didn't tell her son about her visit to the maternity hospital. Ethan also tried to act as if nothing had happened. It was only a week or two later that he asked his mother, "Mum, if it's not too much trouble, could you gather my ex-wife's things from the closet? If she comes back, give them to her." But days and weeks passed, and Annie didn't show up. One day, Sarah, following a strange impulse, dialed her former daughter-in-law's number, only to be told that the number no longer existed. 6 years passed. A nervous clatter of heels echoed in the corridor, and Sarah instinctively tried to make herself as small as possible. The sound stopped in front of the door of her tiny room, where she had spent her days and nights for the past years. A moment later, the heels clattered again, but in the opposite direction. The elderly woman breathed a sigh of relief, but immediately tensed up again as she heard an irritated voice. "Ethan, go see what's wrong with your mother. Maybe she's finally kicked the bucket. She's stinking up the whole apartment." Her son's voice overlapped the noise of running water, and Sarah realized he was in the bathroom. "Gloria, is it so hard for you to check yourself? Or would your crown fall off if you paid a little attention to my mother?" The daughter-in-law giggled. "No, Ethan, I'm just afraid of dead people." "Fine, I'll go check." Shuffling footsteps approached and the door opened. Ethan stood on the threshold and smiled. "Mum, why are you hiding here like a mouse? Or have you decided to give us another provocation?" The mother timidly said, "No, son, I'm just trying not to disturb you." Gloria's neatly coiffed head popped out from behind Ethan's back. "Oh my God, what am I hearing? Sarah doesn't want to disturb us. A laudable wish, and frankly, I can't wait for the day when I don't have to see your sour face." Ethan lightly scolded his wife. "Gloria, easy on the attitude. This is my mother after all." The young woman took the towel from his hands. "Then tell your mum to clean her room once in a while. And can we have a child in these conditions? That's impossible!" the man exclaimed. Is my mother preventing that?" "You still ask? She'll get in the way. She'll want to babysit. She's going to come in with her stupid parenting and unsolicited advice. No, I don't agree to that." "And what do you suggest?" "You know very well what I'm suggesting." "No, that's out of the question. I don't want my mother to spend her last days in a nursing home," Ethan said uncertainly. Sarah's heart grew cold. It wasn't the first time she'd heard such talk. At first, Gloria had seemed quite nice to her. They had even shared tea in the dining room and watched soap operas together. But one day she overheard her daughter-in-law insinuating to her son, "Ethan, I don't like this neighbourhood. Your mother's presence constantly stresses me out. I can't even shower in peace. I always feel like she's watching me." To his wife's complaints, the son replied harshly, "Gloria, you're working yourself up. You need to calm down. I'm not moving out of this apartment just because you don't like living near my mother." "Then have her move into another apartment, or at least room. It's an unreasonable luxury for an elderly person to occupy so much space." As the saying goes, constant dripping wears away a stone. Gloria's persistent complaints eventually affected Ethan, and he suggested that his mother move into a room with a small window. In better times, when his father was still alive, it had been a dressing room. Later, it became a storage space for unnecessary items. And, like a mockery of fate, the landlady herself became the unnecessary item too. To clear the room of junk, her son and daughter-in-law hired 2 dubious-looking men. They then moved Sarah's belongings from her spacious bedroom to this small space. The elderly woman watched this process and wept, but no one paid attention to her tears. Only her new daughter-in-law remarked in passing, "Why shed tears in vain? You'll be comfortable here on your own, and I'll be able to receive clients in your room after renovation. It'll be an addition to our budget." Gloria worked at the music school, but gave lessons at home. No sooner had Sarah settled into her new quarters than a piano appeared in the apartment, turning the woman's life into a complete nightmare. She couldn't rest during the day or enter the kitchen when Gloria had students. Once she decided to defy her daughter-in-law's ban and left her room during a lesson. That evening, a scandal erupted in the apartment. Gloria berated her husband, not mincing words. "Ethan, control your mother. I have people over, and she crawls out of her kennel, wandering around the apartment in a shabby robe." Sarah expected her son to defend her, but he sided with his wife and started criticizing her. "Mum, don't take offence, but Gloria's right. You've completely stopped looking after yourself. You dress sloppily, and your hair's a mess. You receive a good pension. You could tidy yourself up." While saying all this, the son seemed to forget that his mother's pension contributed significantly to the family budget. She was afraid to remind him of this fact, as Ethan believed he was the sole provider for the family. But things were going poorly at the company he had inherited from his late father. From an overheard conversation, she knew the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. All this forced the elderly woman to reassess her life. Lately, Sarah often reminisced about the not-so-distant past, which now seemed like her happiest time. Back then she still had her strength and a reliable friend. But she had completely lost touch with Tovah. Gloria had learned from neighbours that the concierge had rented out her apartment and moved in with her daughter. Tovah now had 3 grandchildren to care for, and her son-in-law, in gratitude, had brought her a trip to a resort. Tovah was living the good life, as they say. Sarah felt happy for her friend, but then thought sadly, "I could have done well too if I hadn't started that unfair game back then. If only I could go back to the day I had that ridiculous idea to separate Ethan from Annie." The truth about the paternity of Annie's children no longer seemed as important as it once had. Sarah had heard many stories of men raising children who weren't biologically theirs. During Gloria's absence, She would walk in the park, where she had once met Annie's friend long ago. Nothing had changed there. Mothers still strolled with their strollers, discussing crucial topics, what to feed babies and how to protect them from colds. One day she stayed in the park longer than usual. Upon returning home and opening the apartment door, she realized her daughter-in-law and son were arguing again. Gloria screamed hysterically. "How should I know where the old bag went?" Ethan yelled back. "Don't you dare call my mother names." To defuse the situation, the old woman entered the room where the argument was taking place. "Don't quarrel, my dears. I was in the park." Gloria immediately turned on her mother-in-law. "Look at her, still smiling. No, I can't take this any more." The young woman stormed past her mother-in-law, shooting her a hateful glance. Ethan said disapprovingly, "Mum, you can't do that. You have to let her know about your absences." Years of pent-up frustration finally boiled over, and Sarah couldn't hold back. "Should I ask your wife's permission to use the restroom? Ethan, I'm still of sound mind, and I'm not 5 years old to answer to anyone. In case you've forgotten, I'm still the owner of this apartment, and I don't appreciate your Gloria bossing me around." The man hadn't expected such a reaction, and was taken aback. When he regained his composure, his mother heard him say, "I don't like your condition. Something really needs to be done about it. It's dangerous to leave you home alone." In her son's words, the elderly woman sensed a threat. That night, while the couple slept soundly, she carefully opened the door, a small bag in her hands. Once on the street, Sarah crossed herself and whispered, "Whatever happens, I can't go on like this." Public transportation had stopped running, so the woman walked towards the railway station. Gina had been making dumplings since the evening. She knew her son-in-law loved this dish and wanted to please him. She had a special recipe for the dough, ensuring the dumplings were always delicious and never fell apart. When the doorbell rang, she hastily wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to the hallway. "Are they here already? It's too early." Opening the door, she froze for a moment. On the threshold, smiling guiltily, stood an elderly woman in an old-fashioned coat. She barely recognized her as Sarah. "Sarah? Is that you?" "Yes, it's me, Gina. I didn't want to bother you, but I have nowhere else to go." Annie's mother stepped aside. "Come in. You must be tired from the road." "Yes, a little. I had to sit at the station all night and my legs are very sore." Although Gina was concerned about the reason for the uninvited guest's appearance, she considered it indelicate to pester her with questions. "Come in, Sarah. I'll give you some hot tea to warm you up. I have raspberry jam for my guests." The hostess smiled. "The boys love sweets so much that I have to hide them." The guest looked straight into the hostess's eyes. "How old are they now?" "They're in their 7th year. They started 1st grade in September. They're such tomboys. If you leave them for a minute, they'll do something naughty." Sarah struggled to say, "You're lucky. I could have been happy, but I drew the wrong ticket." Gina sat down beside her. "What's the use of reminiscing now? We have to live in the present." "And I can't. I want to, but I can't. I keep going back to the same day." The guest burst into tears, and Gina didn't try to comfort her. She realized that Sarah needed to cry. When she felt a little relief, Sarah told Annie's mother everything. "I alone am to blame for everything, and I have no forgiveness. I don't expect it. I just wanted to relieve my soul, to talk it out. My daughter-in-law doesn't need me now. I'm a nuisance even to my son. They've decided to declare me incompetent and put me in a boarding house." The hostess muttered, "What a horror!" But the guest paid no attention to her remark. "And I ran away from them. I'd rather live on the street than in an institution for insane old people. Don't worry, I'll be right out. I see you're expecting guests." "Yes, Annie is coming with children." "How is she?" "Fine. You could even say she's happy. She's lucky. She's met a very nice man."
Is it Jacob?
Do you know him?
I've seen him from afar, but I haven't met him in person.
Sarah put aside her empty cup and got up with difficulty.
Thank you for the tea. I'll go.
Gina tried to dissuade her.
Where will you go? You don't know anyone here. No, I'll find shelter somewhere. I don't have much time left. I wanted to see you and tell you everything. You accepted my penance, for which I thank you very much.
Sarah headed uncertainly for the door, but Gina asked, And grandchildren? Don't you want to see your grandchildren? She felt a lump in her throat and with difficulty said,
I'd like that very much.
They look so much like their father, just like him. The elderly woman did not have an opportunity to say anything in reply, as the front door opened and 2 boys rushed into the hallway shouting, Grandma, we're here. Seeing the strange woman, the children stopped and politely said, Good morning. Sarah whispered,
Hello, boys.
One boy looked at her with surprise and turned to Gina. Grandma, why is this old lady crying? Did someone hurt her? The woman had unsolicited tears rolling from her eyes too. Yes, Peter, and they hurt her badly. The other boy jumped up to the guest and reached for her bag. Let me take it to the living room. Is it too heavy for you?
Thank you.
Sarah handed her bag to the boy, who looked uncannily like little Ethan. She looked at Gina and whispered,
My God, I only now realize what I've done. There's no forgiveness for me.
Gina said thoughtfully, Any sin is forgiven if repentance is sincere. The boys checked their arsenal of toys and grabbing the scooters that grandmother kept separately, headed for the door. Grandma, don't worry. We'll only race in the driveway. We won't go on the road. The second boy, who helped the guest with the bag, shouted, We'll meet Mum and Dad. They went to the store for sour cream. Dad said that dumplings taste better with sour cream, but I like them better with mayonnaise. Gina looked at her grandchildren with emotion. Such daredevils. Annie and Jacob also have a daughter. She's 1 year old. The boys have already tried to teach her to play soccer. They have so much energy that sometimes it's scary. Sarah was almost afraid of meeting Annie. When a slightly overweight, beautiful woman entered the apartment, she did not recognize her former daughter-in-law, but Annie recognized the one who had once changed her life forever. Rather rudely, she asked the guest, Why did you come here? Isn't it enough what you've already done? Do you want to destroy something else? The mother said to her daughter strictly, Annie, stop it. Sarah has already gotten the full measure of what she did. Will you at least let her see her grandchildren? For 6.5 years, she didn't want to see her grandchildren, and now she suddenly remembers they exist? Sarah, you gave up on them, didn't you? The guest saw that the young mother was on the verge of a breakdown. She slipped out the door and wandered towards the station. She sat down at a town square until late afternoon. She discovered that she had left her bag at Gina's house, but she didn't dare to return there. Unfortunately, the documents and money were also left in the bag, and she could not return to the city without them. There were no tears, probably from the experience, and Sarah fell asleep sitting on the bench. Gina's voice woke her up. Annie, there she is sitting on the bench. Tell her everything yourself. Sarah opened her eyes and saw Annie in front of her. She sat down uncertainly beside her. Don't take offence at me. I spoke too harshly, but, you know, there are reasons for it. In principle, I am not angry with you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have learned what true feminine happiness is. I guess such trials are necessary in life, and you will always be able to see your grandchildren. Gina was already fussing nearby. Come in, Sarah. There's no reason to sit here freezing. You'll sleep at my place tonight, and tomorrow we'll think of something.